Test.
All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Every one of us. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, subscribers and anybody else who happens to stumble upon this message, Beit Torah, Shnexo, PA. As always, we welcome our subscribers, their family. I don't know who you all are, but your family, okay? So, we are pioneering a whole new horizon here today. I can't print out my message, so I gotta use the computer. Oy vey. Boy, do I need help. I don't know, I'm not wired for this. So, the Parashah today is Shemot. We begin Shemot, which means names. And I'm going to do something very different. I want to just briefly cover the events in the history somewhat leading up to where Moshe encounters Yehovah. Think about your own life when you first encountered Yehovah. Think about the dialogue you had. What I want to do today, I don't have per se any, deep teaching, Hebrew words and meanings and, connections throughout certain scriptures of some sorts. But what I just want to do today is I extracted from the Parashah the dialogue between Moshe and Yehovah. And I'm going to try and replicate that dialogue. And what I want you to do is to just ask the Lord to kind of awaken your sensibilities to the personalness of God, Jehovah, and how He dialogues with you, and how He's dialoguing with Moshe, and how real and personal it is. And ask God to really enlighten you in the depth of His just genuineness with His creation and His creation of a human being, a humankind. Because this is an example for all of us. And so we review the 12 tribes basically who came into Egypt with Yaakov: Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yissachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. In all, there were 70 descendants of Yaakov. And Joseph was already in Egypt. Joseph died, as did his brothers and all that generation. In last Parashah, we covered where Jacob, Yaakov, gathered himself up and he went to sleep. He died. And now we see that Joseph died. And we're now in Mitzrayim, Egypt, where a group of 70 that came down into Egypt is beginning to multiply. Because it says here in verse 6, Joseph died, as did all his brothers and all that generation. The descendants of Yisrael, which Yaakov's name was also Yisrael, which we all know means to wrestle with God. But it says that the descendants of Yisrael were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew very powerful, and the land became filled with them. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit here because there's something very apparent here about what we read in Bereshit, in Genesis, many parshas ago. We're seeing the basic outline of the first mitzvot, where God said, be fruitful and multiply. And here we are, what? From creation to where we are now, it's about the year 1400 right now. Not quite, 1200. Okay? And that means there's, from creation, started in 4000, and we're down to 12 or 1400 BC. Quite a few years. But the descendants of Yaakov were fruitful. They increased abundantly, they multiplied and grew very powerful, and the land became filled with him. So when we go back to Bereshit 1, verse 8, Yehovah, God, planted a garden toward the east in Eden. There he put the person whom he had formed. Now, take notice. It says he planted a garden toward the east in Eden. Did you ever plant a garden? What happens when you plant a garden? Get your envelope of seeds and plant a garden, right? But God planted the garden, but there's nobody there to take care of it. He did the first thing. He planted the seed. But it wasn't until there he put the person whom he had formed. So you have the seed, the person he formed, and then in verse 9, it says, out of the ground, Yehovah God caused to grow every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God planted the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Very interesting. Now, if you're part of our mitzvot study, as we're going through, forever how long it takes, years, 613 mitzvot, we're going to go through them. It says, Adonai God took the person and put him in the garden, verse 15, to cultivate and care for it. Then Adonai God said, gave the person an order. You may freely eat from every tree in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You are not to eat from it, because on the day that you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. And so, my point here is that God did his part, and in order for the garden to flourish, it wasn't until God put man in the garden, as it says in verse 15, to cultivate and care for it. Guess what? Things didn't start producing, flourishing, till man did his part. What a principle in our own lives. God is involved in our lives. But God help us to recognize when he's done his part, when he's planted the seeds in our lives for the things that he has for us, that we recognize that our part now is to cultivate it and to take care of it. Very interesting. So we see that in the beginning of Shemot 1, the narrative is pointing out that the descendants of Israel were fruitful, they increased abundantly and multiplied and grew very powerful. It's apparent that we go from Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov to the 12, that God, through Joseph, brought them, led them, planted the seeds for their sustenance and their, for generation. God's doing his part. And they are flourishing and multiplying. Now we come to where things begin to change. And I guess what I want us to see here is how God's doing his part and Israel has to do theirs. Yehovah is doing his part and Moshe has to do his part in order to unite with Yehovah to accomplish his purposes. And so we see the word fruitful, which is raah, which means to bear fruit, to be fruitful, to increase. In ancient Israelite culture, fruitfulness was a significant concept, both agriculturally and in terms of family lineage. The ability to bear children was seen as a blessing from Yehovah, and agricultural abundance was a sign of divine favor. The idea of fruitfulness is deeply embedded in the covenantal promises given to the patriarchs, where God promises to make them fruitful and multiply their descendants. The word to multiply or abound in Hebrew is sharatz, which means to swarm or teem or abound. It's primarily conveys the idea of swarming or teeming, a prolific, abundant movement of creatures, particularly small animals in aquatic life. It depicts the natural world's capacity for life and growth, reflecting God's creative power and the abundance of his creation. In the ancient Near Eastern context, the concept of swarming or teeming was closely associated with fertility and the life-giving aspects of nature. The abundance of creatures in bodies of water is seen as a divine blessing of sustaining power of the Creator. So it's an overwhelming presence or movement of people or armies. So we see that the descendants of Yaakov after the 12 brothers and their ongoing descendants, they were flourishing in Egypt. They were teeming, they were swarming, they were multiplying and abounding. And then it says they became mighty, powerful, numerous. Awesome, to be strong, mighty, numerous, or powerful. So they've kind of reached the pinnacle of their development, wouldn't you say? Now, the time of Joseph was somewhere between 2000 and 1600 BC. The time of Moshe was 1350 to 1250. And so, if we go back to Joseph, it says, there arose a new king over Egypt, and he knew nothing about Joseph. And I want us to see that Joseph was 1600 BC, and Moses was 1350 to 1250 as it descends. It's around a 600 to 750 year gap. Now let me ask you a question. Just to kind of relate to that, can you tell me what happened about 750 years ago right now? Do you remember? Who was in power? Who made incredible impressions on the culture? I can think of some here and there. We're a little bit more advanced and information is a bit more broad spread. But the point is that the new king knew nothing about Joseph. And consequently, as a result, knew nothing about the Israelites and more or less where they came from, and that at one time the prime minister of Egypt is where they were all related to. But he recognized that they became too numerous and powerful, and that as a result they needed to use wisdom in how they deal with them. If we don't, they'll continuously multiply, and in the event that we have any wars, they might ally themselves with our enemies. They feared that. So this is where the whole slave thing comes into play. It says they put slave masters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. They basically enslaved them. And bear in mind, Egypt had two ruling monarchies in a sense, and there was always a tension there between the north and the south, and there was threats always to overthrow one kingdom or another within Egypt. And so it says that they put slave masters over the Israelites, and they built the storage cities of Pithom and Ramses. The Egyptians oppressed them, but yet the Israelites continued to multiply and expand. However, the Egyptians came to dread the people of Israel and worked them relentlessly. That's what you do with slaves, right? You work them relentlessly, making their lives bitter with hard labor, digging clay, making bricks, all kinds of field work. And in all this toil, they were shown no mercy. Sounds like a slave to me. So we have that dilemma evolving within Egypt. But the Israelites continue to multiply and flourish and become powerful. Now the king of Egypt recognized this, and as a result, he says, we got to do something in order to hold back these people from flourishing, and there's a threat there. And so the king spoke to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who attended Hebrew women giving birth. And the Pharaoh instituted a rule for the midwives that in their participating in the birthing process, if it was a boy, they were to kill him. If it was a girl, let her live. Looks like they had, what do they call that today? They want to kill babies after they're born. There's nothing new under the sun, is there? They were doing it 4,000 years ago. And we're supposed to be civilized? I don't know. There's something missing in that civilized context, that civilized definition. And so the midwives, however, were God-fearing women. And they didn't do as the king of Egypt ordered them. They let the boys live. And so the king of Egypt called them on the carpet and said, why have you done this and let the boys live? Their response was, well, the Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. The Hebrew women go into labor and give birth before the midwives even arrive. So God prospered the midwives, and the people continued to multiply and grow very powerful. The midwives feared God, and He made them founders of families. Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: every boy that is born, throw in the river, and let all the girls live. Now, Amram and Jochebed were a married couple, and they had a son and a daughter. I believe the son was Aaron, and I believe the daughter had to be Miriam. But Amram and Jochebed conceived and had a son. She hid him for 3 months, and when she could no longer hide him, she took a papyrus basket, coated it with clay and tar, and put the child in it, and placed it among the reeds on the riverbank. Bethia, the daughter of Pharaoh, came out to bathe in the river. But the sister of this male child, stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Spotting the basket among the reeds, Bithiah sent her slave girl to get the basket. She opened it, and in front of her eyes was a crying baby boy. Moved with pity, she said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." And that boy's sister, I believe Miriam, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find you one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" Pharaoh's daughter answered and said, "Yes, go." Now how profound is that? How supernatural. The hand of God was determined to guide Moses as a 3-month-old baby in the water of the Nile to float down at the time that Bithiah, the daughter of Pharaoh, just happened to be out there bathing. And she came upon him. She saw him. Coincidence? There are no coincidences. Timing? God's timing. Try to look at your own life in this respect. God made a way. God has, or is, or will make a way for you in whatever comes your way, whatever comes our way. Why? Because He's God. He's revealed Himself as Emmanuel, God who's with us. So the woman, the young lady, took the child and nursed it. And when the child had grown some, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she began to raise him as her son. Now, I don't have it in my notes, but I just know it from having read it. If you go to Acts 7, verse 20, and read a couple verses there, I find some interesting key points about Moshe. It says, he was trained in the wisdom of Egypt. Really important. What is the wisdom of Egypt? You remember Joseph? When his cup was taken? This was 1 or 2 or 3 weeks ago in the Parashah. He accused Benjamin, "What did you take my cup, my wine cup for? I use it for divination." What knowledge was revealed there? What wisdom of Egypt is there in such a degree that God, even in the Torah and in the Gospels and Epistles? Interesting. And Egypt holds a special place in God's heart. And if you read the prophets, you'll discover that. And so Moshe is nurtured and groomed in the house of Pharaoh. And now he begins to integrate into the culture and the position he happens to have as a adopted son of Bithia, the daughter of Pharaoh. She gave him a name. She called him Moshe, which means pulled out, because I pulled him out of the water. Moshe was a grown man. When he was a grown man, he went out to visit his kinsmen. So we know that he knew that he was one of the Hebrews. It says it right there. He went out to visit his kinsmen. It says he watched them struggling at forced labor, and he saw an Egyptian strike a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. And so Moshe responded, and he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. Big mistake. Big mistake for anybody. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrew men fighting, and he confronted them and says, why are you hitting your companion, your kinsman? Who appointed you ruler and judge over us? They responded. Do you intend to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? Wow, can you imagine that? Somebody trying to do something good so that people don't get hurt, and they say, what, are you going to kill me too? And with that, Moshe became frightened and thought that the matter has become known, and he fled. When Pharaoh heard of it, he tried to have Moshe put to death, but Moshe fled to the land of Midian. Now, if you know where Midian is, you have the Sinai Peninsula, you have the Sea of Suf, and then you have Midian. So, kind of interesting. From Ramses, Moshe had to travel down through a rocky area and get to the beach of what today is called Moab. And interesting how God prepared him for the Exodus by him fleeing because he feared. And he crossed over. I'm sure there was a way to get across. Didn't part the sea yet. That came later. But he got across into Midian. And one day as he was sitting by a well, the daughters of the priests of Midian came. Now, we see more about the priest of Midian, which was Jethro. And Jethro advised, he was an advisor to Pharaoh. That's pretty much historically documented in the writings. And so one day as Moshe was sitting by a well, the daughters of Jethro came and filled the troughs to water their father's sheep. It's kind of interesting. That's twice now that the women were tending to the sheep. You remember Rachel? When she came to Jacob, she was tending her father's sheep. Very key person. And now we see here the daughters of Jethro, which one of them was Zipporah, which became Moshe's wife. She was tending her father's sheep. Unfortunately, those shepherds came and tried to drive the daughters away. And Moshe got up and defended them, and I guess he scared them away. It says he was a very strong man. And Moshe got up and defended them, and then he watered their sheep. And the daughters returned back to home or their tent or their whatever. And the father said, Jethro said, how come you're back so soon today? And they said, well, there was an Egyptian that rescued us from the shepherds who drew water for us, and he watered the sheep. And the father's first response, not having any sons, having all daughters, out in the middle of nowhere, wondered, okay, where is that man? And he says, where is he? Invite him to have something to eat. I want to meet the guy. And Moshe was glad to stay on with the man, and he gave Moshe his daughter Zipporah in marriage. And as we know, she gave birth to a son named Gershom. And during those years, the king of Egypt died. That was set on killing Moshe for killing that Egyptian. So the nation of Israel, still under slavery, groaned under the yoke of slavery and cried out. And their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, Yehovah. Yehovah heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Yehovah saw the people of Israel. God acknowledged them. Now we see another quality about God. God acknowledged them. Do you feel when you had your first encounter with God, were you seeking after him? Or did he acknowledge you? Did you cry out in your turmoil and struggle where you were, or even now in your life? Cry out. He acknowledged you. And even now, he will acknowledge you if you cry out to him. These are life lessons. This is seeing God in real time and circumstances. And because we have moments where he just doesn't seem to be there, doesn't mean he's not there. Maybe he's waiting for you to cry out. I can attest to that in my own life. I've been situations and moments where I cried out. And I can honestly say God responded. So now what I want to do is I want to focus in on Moses, on Moshe. And I want to focus in on the dialogue between Yehovah and Moshe. Moshe was tending the sheep of Yitro, his father-in-law, and he was leading the flock to the far side of the desert. Isn't it interesting? God always finds us when we wander around to the far side of life, where we shouldn't be, or where we happen, the circumstances take us, the circumstances in life take us there, whatever that may be, homelessness, turmoil, family problems. I could go on and on. We could think of many health issues. It's interesting because it was on the far side of the mountain I wonder how those astronauts were on the far side of the moon. I never know. They read some scripture. So, but on the far side of the desert, Moshe came to the mountain of God, which was Horeb. And the angel of Yehovah appeared to him in a fire blazing from the middle of the bush. From the side of the bush, or the bottom of the bush, from the middle of the bush. Moshe looked and saw that although the bush was flaming with fire, the bush was not being burned up. And he said, he thought to himself, it says he said, Moshe said, I wonder if he spoke out loud to himself. There's fire in that bush. It's not burning. There's no smoke. Where there's fire, there's smoke. But in this one, there was fire, but there was no smoke. Doesn't say there was any smoke. Moshe said, I'm going over to see this amazing sight. Something he had never seen before. Perhaps God will reveal to you something you've never seen before. Experience something you've never seen before or experienced. For what? For what reason? To reveal himself to you. Where are you? Are you on that far side of the desert in life? Cry out to God. Cry out to Jehovah. And you'll see something amazing when he responds to you. Which he will. You just gotta believe. You just gotta believe. Avraham believed. He didn't do some great thing. He just, God said, because you believed, I counted that for righteousness concerning you. And so, I begin the dialogue here. I'm going to do my best. Just bear with me. This is something new. I just was moved to do this because I really wanted, besides getting all the details of everything going on, I really wanted to just look at the dialogue. And so I'm going to point out when Jehovah's speaking and when Moshe responds or speaks. So, God called to Moshe from the middle of the bush. Moshe! Moshe! And Moshe responded, Hinene, Hinene, here I am. Don't come any closer. Take your sandals off your feet, because the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov. It says Moshe covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Bear in your thoughts as we move into Shemot. In this instant, Moshe was afraid. But as God reveals himself to him, and Moshe gets to know Yehovah, he's not afraid. I say to you, when you cry out to God, there's no need to be afraid when he reveals himself to you. Jehovah responds, I have seen how my people are being oppressed in Egypt. And heard their cry for release from their slave masters. Because I know their pain, I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that country to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amori, the Prizzi, the Hivi, and the Yebusi. Yes, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen how terribly the Egyptians oppressed them. Therefore, now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you can lead my people, the descendants of Israel, out of Egypt. Moshe responds, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the people out of Egypt? Jehovah says, I will surely be with you. Your sign that I have sent you will be that when you have led the people out of Egypt, you will worship Yehovah on this mountain. Moshe says, look, when I appear before the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What am I to tell them? Jehovah says, Eye, Asher, Eye, I am, will be, what I am, will be. Here is what to say to the people of Israel. Eye, I am, or I will be, has sent me to you. Say this to the people of Israel. Yud-He Vav-He, the God of your fathers, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered generation after generation. And I pause because they do now know what the vows are and the name by which God wishes to be addressed by his people, Israel. And that is Yehovah. Go, gather the leaders of Israel together and say to them, Yehovah, the God of your fathers, the God of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, has appeared to me and said, I have been paying close attention to you and have seen what it is that is being done to you in Egypt. And I have said that I will lead you up out of the misery of Egypt to the land of Canaan, the Hittite, the Amori, the Prizzi, the Hivi, and the Yebusi, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will heed what you say. Then you will come, you and the leaders of Israel, before the king of Egypt. And you will tell him, Yehovah, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please, Let us go 3 days' journey into the desert, so that we can sacrifice to Yehovah our God. I know that the king of Egypt will not let you leave unless he is forced to do so. And I will reach out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will do there. After that, he will let you go. Moreover, I will make the Egyptians so well disposed towards this people that when you go, you won't go empty-handed. Rather, all the women will ask their neighbors and house guests for silver and gold jewelry and clothing, with which you will dress your own sons and daughters. In this way, you will plunder the Egyptians. Moshe responds, but I'm certain they won't believe me. And they won't listen to what I say, because they'll say, Yehovah did not appear to you. Yehovah responds, what is that in your hand? A staff. Throw it on the ground. Put your hand out and take it by the tail. This is so that they will believe that Yehovah, the God of their fathers, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov, has appeared to you. Now, Moshe, put your hand inside your coat. Pulled it out. It's filled with leprosy. Now, Moshe, put your hand back in your coat. And it was restored. If they won't believe you or heed the evidence of the first sign, they will be convinced by the second. But if they aren't persuaded even by both these signs and still won't listen to what you say, then take some water from the river, pour it on the ground. The water you take from the river will turn into blood on the dry land. It's interesting because Moshe responds. He kind of changes the subject. He says, oh, Yehovah, I'm a terrible speaker. I always have been. And I'm no better now, even after you've spoken to your servant. My words come slowly. My tongue moves slowly. Jehovah responds, Moshe, who gives a person a mouth? Who makes a person dumb or deaf, keen-sighted or blind? Isn't it I, Yehovah? Now therefore go. I will be with your mouth and will teach you what to say. Moshe says, please, Lord, send someone else, anyone you want, but me. Jehovah responds, don't you have a brother, Aharon, the Levi? I know that he's a good speaker. In fact, here he is now, coming out to meet you, and he'll be happy to see you. You will speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and his teaching you both what to do. I will be with your mouth and his teaching you both what to do. Thus, he will be your spokesman to the people. In effect, for you, he will be a mouth, and for him, you will be like God. Now take this staff in your hand, because you need it to perform the signs. Moshe responds, I beg you to let me go and return to my kinsmen in Egypt to see if they are still alive. He speaks to Yitro. And because Moshe had made an arrangement to be a help to Yitro and to tend his sheep. And so he humbly begs him to let him go and return to Egypt. And Yitro says, go in peace. Jehovah says then, go on back to Egypt, because all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moshe took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started out for Egypt. And then this is an interesting point here. If you look back in this dialogue, God tells Moshe to throw down his staff. Now, I would presume that Moshe had a staff. But as we go further on in the dialogue between Moshe and Jehovah, it's very clear. It says, Moshe took God's staff in his hand. So whose staff was it? Something to think about. Jehovah responds and says to Moshe, when you go back to Egypt, make sure that you do before Pharaoh every one of the wonders I have enabled you to do. Nevertheless, I'm going to make him hard-hearted, and he will refuse to let the people go. This is really important, because God is prophesying here. This was the angel of the Lord. Now, who's the angel of the Lord? He's carrying a staff that he gave to Moshe. And now he's prophesying and says, I'm going to make him hard-hearted, and he will refuse to let the people go. Then you are to tell Pharaoh, Yehovah says, Yisrael is my firstborn son. I have told you to let my son go in order to worship me, but you have refused to let him go. Well then, I will kill your firstborn son. Did you know God warned Pharaoh that he was going to kill his firstborn son for denying God's firstborn son freedom to come out 3 days into the desert and the people of Israel to come and worship their God? Pharaoh was warned. And so at the lodging place on the way, well, we know the incident where Moshe failed to circumcise Gershom, and Zipporah was pretty upset with that. So, but she circumcised him, not Moshe.